Hi, I'm Patricia Amira, a broadcaster and trustee of Equality Now, which is an international women's rights organization that takes on discrimination in the law. It challenges ingrained cultural assumptions and calls out inequality wherever it exists. And we do this with the help of numerous local partners across the globe. Today on At Home With, our ongoing series of conversations with a selection of cultural voices, we will be focused on the powerful new documentary called On the Record. It details allegations of sexual assault against music mogul Russell Simmons, as well as exploring the struggles of Black women in the Me Too movement and the barriers to justice that many Black women face. The documentary by acclaimed directors Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick got caught in a media storm prior to its premiere at the Sundance Film Festival this year. That was after Oprah Winfrey pulled out as an executive producer and the distribution of On the Record was threatened. The filmmakers and survivors campaigned to get the film to public release, finding a home for it with HBO Max. Released in late May, the film has been receiving rave reviews. Now, joining us in our conversation are music producer Drew Dixon and writer and pioneering hip-hop artist Sheri Hines. Both, along with numerous other women, say they have survived being raped by Simmons, fearing to speak out only until very recently because of the potential consequences of being viewed as traitors within their community. Now, this is a radical, stimulating documentary, raising complex issues that need to be heard far and wide, which is why I'm so pleased Drew and Sheri are with us today. Welcome to you both, and thank you for sharing your deeply personal stories in order for this important documentary to be made. Now, I imagine that it's a day-to-day, a step-by-step process of healing. Some days better than others. So I'd like to just begin by asking each of you just how you're doing.
Go ahead, Drew, you can start.
Well, I would say that, counterintuitively, today is a good day. I think that the upheaval that we're seeing in the world in response to the killing of Floyd and the call for Black liberation gives me hope. And I see the film that we participated in at the intersection of that upheaval and the upheaval of the Me Too movement. And I am optimistic that if we continue to raise our voices, we can move forward and away from this paradigm of really the white supremacist patriarchy that has suffocated Black lives and the autonomy of so many women. Mm-hmm. And so that gives me hope and makes me feel very proud of the decision to participate in this film and to come forward. And not every day has been good since I made those decisions. But this is a good day. And I feel so much stronger today, to be honest with you, than I was 2.5 years ago when I walked into the New York Times and was truly terrified. And then honestly set back for several months because I was suddenly adopting the identity, the part of my identity that was a rape victim, which I tried to write out of my story, even in my own mind. And that actually took me backwards in terms of my self-confidence before it kind of all came back together and I started to heal. So I feel that I'm in a good place in terms of my own personal healing and in terms of where I am as a part of the broader momentum towards hopefully some kind of justice.
Yes. Yeah. We'll talk about that, of course, in a moment. Sheri?
Hi. How I'm feeling today is just it stems from you start getting answers of why and struggles that you went through as a child and never knew that you was actually being prepared for things that was to come today. And so for me, it's all of this stuff, like growing up in the Bronx and dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, you know, being raised by a single parent with 11 children, and the Bronx was like the third world country of New York. And so every day was a battle for me. Every day was a struggle from a child on. So from that, I always didn't know why was I born into this struggle all the time and always having to take on things. And then, you know, going out there and, you know, starting off an all-female DJ rap group. In the time hip hop, it was just all male arena. So it's always been challenges for me. And as far as when I came out in 2017, that was more of a thing of healing, and I felt I had support, because when this happened to me over 30 years ago, I didn't know nobody else he did this to. And so it was me against the culture of, you know, coming out, and then who's gonna believe me, because nobody else ever came out on Russell, and he was leading hip hop into a mainstream at the time. So it was me. I you know, it was no back. At least I did share my story with people that was closer or who knew about it, but it didn't go. I didn't share it nowhere else in fear of what it would do with me, of what I was trying to do as a female rapper.
Yeah.
So that, with all of that being said, I come out in 2017, and I came out kind of, it was overwhelming, and it was like, wow, I can't believe this. And it was more of the fact that all of these women are coming out, and I just felt like I finally had a safety net. I had support. I'm not, people look and said, wow, my truth was my truth, even though I wrote about it, indicated it in my book that I wrote, a hip hop book I wrote in 2006. So it's just that when I came out and had all these women that came out, and we never knew each other, but we had, when I'm reading their stories and looking, it was like, that's crazy. This is what he did to me 30 years ago. And so it just felt good that I had all of this, I had leverage. I had other women coming out, and it was not like, now I didn't feel like, dog, who's gonna believe me? So that right there was, at that point, it was overwhelming. Fast forward to Sundance, it was like, wow, this story is really getting ready to be heard after all these years. Somebody, I have a forum and people that's gonna have the resource and let this story to be heard, and to be healing to other people, and also to, you know, to help other people. Like, wow, I held this in for so long, fear of somebody's status, fear of my career, fear of how the backlash I was gonna get from the hip hop culture. So the Sundance was just overwhelming. And it was just like, I cried, because it was like, I couldn't believe this was happening. You know what I mean? Like, wow, finally. And I got to meet some amazing women. And even though we never really knew each other, you could just look at our stories, and I'm like, this is crazy. It was just meant to be. And I think it was timing. How I feel now with everything going on, I'm a true believer is everything has to come to a head. Everything, that's just life. Everything has to evolve. And people, you know, I feel we fighting a lot of wars. We fighting a racial war. We fighting the COVID war. We fighting, and then with the movie, this documentary, you fighting a cleansing. You're fighting a cleansing. Finally, you're feeling stronger. So this is how you put it together. Is just the thing, because I actually was a COVID survivor. So it's actually putting everything together. And I'm like, my grandma always said, no matter what you're going through, just pray. So I didn't need a church to go to. Church was in my house. So I would just be talking to God. Like, but I feel this is a strength of that. This is a time for reset. This is a time for to everything to get revealed. And it's enough is enough in every aspect. And now it's time. And I tell people, don't be scared. And you know, when you're going through this by yourself, because my family lives in Georgia, you have time to think, you have time to just focus, and you have time to try to really get a sense of everything's coming out at one time. And I said, this is meant to be, because it's a storm, but it's going to be treasure through the storm. And it's just a time for everybody to be woke and understand after this is going to be a purpose. It's going to be something that we all fought for years on every level. Women fought for years. They had to be silent, especially as a woman of color and coming up from a certain status. You had to be silenced. Another thing of, you know, our men of color being beat down all the time. You had to be silent. They had to take it. This is all just everything coming to a head.
Coming to a head.
So I actually took to you, in a way, it may sound crazy. I had my days, it was kind of anxiety mixed with everything and a little fear. But every time when I got that to that point, I just would like say, God, I know you're in control of everything. This is a purpose for everything. And I'm just going to trust the process because I know it's going to be treasured on every level out of all of this.
I love it. Very powerful. I'm glad you recovered though from COVID.
Yes, thank you.
But
Well, and I gotta say thanks to Drew because she kept, I was in here sick as a dog. She kept sending me turmeric at my door and ginger.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Because I was like, oh God, I don't want to die. I don't want to go to the hospital. And so it was really challenging, but it made me see what I was made of. So yeah.
It seems like there's a sisterhood that's been created here, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's get into exactly what happened with you both, and of course with other women. Drew, there's something that you had said in the documentary that you'd only decided to speak out after Jenny Lumet spoke about being assaulted by Russell Simmons, and that you didn't want her to twist in the wind, which I thought was an interesting turn of phrase there. How has this documentary unfolded for you?
So I think Jenny is the one who really used that expression in her first person piece in the Hollywood Reporter, where she told the story. And she said she knew that the first two women that came forward about Russell weren't lying, and he called them liars, and she didn't want to let them twist in the wind. And when I read that sentence, so by the time Jenny Lumet's story came out, I'd already spoken to the New York Times off the record. You know, in response to the first two stories and Russell calling the first two women liars, I then accepted an invitation from someone who knew Jodi Kantor to take that meeting. I told them my story, but I told them I didn't want to go on the record. Then Jenny Lumet's story came out. My texts start blowing up from people who've known me, who knew what happened, and they're wondering if I'm going to come forward. And I really wanted to just stay off the record at that point. And I was hoping that it would give the New York Times the momentum they needed to keep going and find somebody else, you know, to go on the record. And then I read that line in Jenny's piece. Like, I finally caught my breath. I got all these texts and I was like, well, let me read this. And she said, I didn't want to let these other women twist in the wind. And then I thought, well, if I don't go on the record, then I'm letting her twist in the wind. And I don't know her, and I don't know these other women, but I'm sure they're not lying. And I also think it's important that Black women get an opportunity to be seen and heard in this movement. And the only way to be seen and heard is to raise your voice and take up space and to insist on it. And I realized that I was in this unique position where I could just make that choice. And just by virtue of speaking out, I would be another Black woman taking up space in this Me Too movement. And that I would be coming to Jenny's defense, even though I didn't know her. I'd never met her at that time. And to the defense of the other two women. And so that's really what inspired me to do it. What was the second part of the question?
No, it's just how this unfolded for you, how the documentary unfolded, how it all came to be. And you pretty much started a little bit about that, yeah.
Right, so the woman who introduced me to Jodi Kantor via email is a mom in my daughter's grade at school. And so I've known her since our kids were like in kindergarten. And we were talking about some like parents event, and Me Too came up, and I briefly alluded to the fact that I had a Me Too story, but I wasn't interested in sharing it. And I sort of alluded to the fact that it had to do with Russell Simmons. And then it wasn't harassment, it was assault. And then I ran into this woman again at Parents' Day, literally. And she texted me the statement where Russell called the two women who'd come forward liars. And then I like ran into her again on the stairs. Like we were like basically meeting with the teachers. And I said, you know what, that statement is so offensive. I would like to know if you can actually introduce me to Jodi Kantor as you offered when I first told you. And by this time, she knew, she's a documentary filmmaker, Liz Garbus, and her husband, Dan Cogan, is the executive producer of this film. He was the executive producer at the time of a film that Amy and Kirby were working on that was about the sort of Me Too movement generally.
Yeah.
And that's how I was introduced to Amy and Kirby, and they wanted to know if they could follow me around as I thought about whether or not I even wanted to go on the record. And I didn't have to sign the release. I could decide later. And I thought, well, you can't unscramble the egg. If I don't agree to do it now, there's no recapturing this moment. I also, around that time, there was some person who came forward about Roy Moore, and it was false. The guy running for Senate in, I want to say, Alabama. And the Washington Post exposed this person as like a false accuser. And it was so absurd the way this person thought they were going to confuse the Washington Post. I was like, you don't just get to call and they run your story. Like, the vetting that's already happening to me, and I'm off the record and they're vetting me. People need to know what this is really like. So that's why I said yes. And I also felt safer, to be honest with you, that this very established filmmaking crew was aware of my whereabouts and my sort of process in the event that I was like intimidated or something bad happened to me because the word had gotten back to either Russell Simmons or L.A. Reid that I was thinking of doing this. I wanted somebody to know. Like, I was literally afraid of them. Yeah. Literally, like in a real life, you know, like they could harm me or you know, do something to make my life difficult, and to try to intimidate me to be silent. And so that made me feel safer. I felt like I had, like, as a David going up against these Goliaths, at least somebody was like rolling camera on David kind of thing. And then it evolved. You know, they continued to film me. I reached out to Sheri separately when I read her story. And then I asked her if she'd be willing to talk with them, because I thought this is another opportunity to expand the lens, to include another Black woman, so that it's not just this story that centers like the Weinstein survivors, and who are amazing, but I wanted the lens to include as many Black women as I could. And then they came to me about 6 months later, the filmmakers, and asked if they could pivot to a film centering, you know, my story and the sort of Russell Simmons story. And I thought about it for 2 weeks, and then I said no, because I was really afraid. It was one thing to be a small part of a documentary about the Me Too movement, foregrounding white women. I thought, okay, that's their wheelhouse. They're in entertainment. I'm just going to be a small part, and hopefully Sheri will be included. But they know how to do that. It's fine. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. These white filmmakers are going to tell the story of, you know, in my case, I'm thinking of it from my perspective, this like light-skinned woman going up against the king of hip hop, as told by two white filmmakers. I'm like, no, hard pass, you know. Yeah. And that became this like gut-wrenching back and forth with Amy and Kirby, where I actually developed a tremendous amount of respect and trust for them, because no matter how adamant I was that I was like, go away, leave me alone, they were like, well, we really were curious about how afraid you were of the backlash, and we read this book by Kimberly Crenshaw, and we were so curious about your comment about Black women not even being allowed to say Me Too, that we read this article about Shanita Hubbard that you should consider reading yourself. And yes, it was so clear that they were listening.
And that's the main thing, isn't it? Listening.
They were listening. They were truly, and they were like, you know, if we never thought about this and we work in this space, then I promise you, outside of the Black community, people don't even understand the additional layers of difficulty that you and Sheri and Salai and Jenny face coming out against a Black man in the context of the persecution of Black men in our society, and in the context of Russell Simmons and everything he represents. And that's kind of how the film evolved and my relationship with them evolved. And, you know, I introduced them to Jen Morgan and Kierna Mayo, and, you know, I
rolled on from that.
And it, you know, and it evolved into this work that I'm so grateful even exists. You know, they really are phenomenal filmmakers. I can't say that enough. And they're true allies. They really listened, and they really learned, and they really were humble about what they didn't know. And they sort of gave us the floor to be seen and heard, and I'm so grateful.
You know, it's interesting that you're talking about listening and learning, and sometimes even just putting things in perspective, because at the crux of your experiences, obviously, is this abuse of power, the dynamics that play out from that, and in this particular instance, of course, for marginalized women. But one of the things that struck me as an African woman was how this film makes a point of touching on the generational cycle of abuses that can be dated back to the horrors of colonialism and slavery. You know, there's the scenes where, you know, you traveled to Ghana and visited Elmina Castle, I think it's called St. George's Castle as well, for instance, which was a reminder of how rape was used to disempower and how the cycle continues to this day. The pain behind the inherited legacy is how it was put. From this perspective, what type of impact has this had in terms of access to justice for women of color in particular for you both?
Justice, I don't think is no justice done yet. It's not, you know, as far as women in color, it's a thing where a lot of women are, for generations, and as I seen with my grandma, all growing up, and they from the South, it's like taught to nurture and protect the Black men of the community. So that said, you seen that the Black man is always beat down justice-wise, economically. He's always beat down. So as women, you didn't want to beat him down either. So a lot that actually gave a lot of room to me is for things like that, because I've heard, like, for generations, aunt or even my mom told the story about a rape, and they were 13, you couldn't say nothing, from an uncle, you know, and all of this stuff. And I look at this, and we're always to protect them. So if we was to come out and say anything, it would actually look like we're helping bring down our Black men. And so I guess with that, and us feeling that responsibility of being the nurturers, when they get beat down, they always come run to our arms or run to us, and we there fighting, and we there trying to protect them. How dare we try to bring them down and say this, which not looking into the thing is that if the person is a predator, or if the person has mental issues and he's doing stuff, now where's the level we're protecting that as well? And by protecting that, we're breeding a generation of women that's not going to come out and say nothing, and they're just going to hold that inside. And then you have these women coming up with a lot of problems of anxiety, trying to get things right, not having good relationships, because you're held accountability of being silent, and you got to be silent, but that's all that virus that's in you, and you better not come out and say anything, and you better not, how dare you bring down this Black man. But this Black man, which like when people had said to me, you know, how you feel about it is like bringing down, I said, I'm not bringing down a Black man. I was a ride or die for Black men. Got to remember, I was riding and dying with the Black men with the hip hop. I was right there with the Black men. So no, it's a predator. See, you got to understand the difference. It's a predator.
Put it into context.
It's the context, right? And so with this, I don't think, like, I came out in LA Times when around the same time when Drew came out in New York Times, I was in LA. What made me really come out is because I felt I had a duty to support these women, because I wrote about this years and decades ago. Nobody believed me. So this was just like the blueprint. Oh, yes, he is like this. Boom. So I felt a need that I needed to come tell my story, because these women are not lying. Mm-hmm. So it's as far as justice, I think we just at the beginning. I think this film is gonna open up a lot of eyes, and, you know, open up and make people really see what's really going on, because it needs to stop. I mean, I know a lot of women of color and suffer in silence, and only because we don't feel we're gonna have resources, or, you know, we're not gonna have the support from our community, and it's just true. And as Kirby and Dick came out, Kirby, Dick, and Amy did this, and they're white, and they came and they gave us a forum to speak our thing, and nobody else gave us that forum of our color. That's something you think about. Like, it's always ignored. Like, okay, even when I came out on Megyn Kelly and all LA, nobody came out with a forum and like, let's hear your story, Sheri. I'm talking about from my community in the hip hop. Nobody. It's just like, oh, well, that's Russell, and oh, okay, you know, that's Russell, and that's really sad. I mean, and it's just a generation of a thing that has to stop.
So what you're saying, there's this black woman's duty to protect black men, which stops them protecting themselves. So just
nurturing.
Yeah. So what has been happening to women who are in this predicament? Yes, you have spoken out, you and a number of women have spoken out, but what happens to these women? How do you even get to healing, even if you did, if we get that far?
It was so important to me in the film, to talk about my experience visiting Ghana. I went with my dad and I went with a group of Howard University professors. It was, I think, less than a year after I was raped. And, I was struck, I can't remember if this is in the film, but there's a cannonball in the courtyard that the express purpose of this cannonball was to chain the ankle of the enslaved women to the cannonball so they could be raped. And I believe the rape served multiple purposes. It systematically sort of broke down the spirit of the women and the men, and I'm going to come back to that, but it also was in the economic interest of the slave trader. More than half of the women, if my memory is correct, who arrived in North America were pregnant at the end of the Middle Passage. So this is a bonus-free asset for the slave trader, an impregnated slave. So I believe Black women, I'm not saying that there are not other marginalized groups of women, Native Americans, others, who are as vulnerable as we are. But we are the only women for whom it was an economically good business decision to rape us. You don't even have to be a sadist. You might just be short on money. Your wife might even tell you, you know what, you need to go impregnate that slave because we're running low. I mean, and then you would like find a way to tell yourself it was coercive and you weren't evil. I mean, for what other group of women is that true for hundreds of years? And so we were raped as a good business decision and to be broken down. And the men at St. George's Castle who tried to defend us were put in this cell called the condemned cell, which I visited on the tour. And we went into the space that's like the size of like the space under like a dining room table. And they shut the door and they turn on a flashlight. It's pitch black and there's scratch marks on the wall. That's where the Black men who tried to defend the Black women were taken to die. Taken to die. And to me, that's all you need to know about how Black people, Black men and women ended up where we are today. The condemned cell still exists in our mind as a community, blocking out the view of the suffering of our own women so that our own men who aren't safe themselves in this country don't defend us. Or they don't defend us in the way that we need to be defended to be free. And it's because they're not free, because none of us are free. And I hope that, again, as we have this conversation about the long overdue liberation of Black people in the world, we can also unlock that condemned cell so that we aren't perpetuating the same dynamic that was used to just absolutely crush the institution of our community. And so that we can be stronger, so that we can go out as a community, as a collective that's healthier, that's not enabling the abuse of our little girls and our little boys. There's sexual abuse that happens in our community to little boys. Let's break that cycle so that we can be stronger as we face the headwinds in society that are now roiling our globe. We are the ones who can least afford to go out hobbled into the world. So let's just eradicate the truly malignant actors and then come together united and stronger, drawing a line about what we will and won't tolerate for our own people so that we have a fighting chance.
So what do you think needs to change so that people feel safe coming forward? People like yourselves, let's keep it with the women for the moment.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to change?
I think right now, what needs to change is, and this is from my experience and my opinion, is by like me even coming out and coming up from the culture I grew up in hip hop, and the status I grew up as, like, you know, poverty and all of that. I think by me even having a voice coming out, it's making maybe a lot of other women that feel that they're not important enough, or feel that they don't have a safety net, or nobody's going to support them because, oh, you're nobody, nobody's going to listen to you, got raped, you just got to be, you know, take it and keep going. So maybe if more people that they can relate to, and more people come out that they feel like, wow, that's just like me, and
Yeah.
she did it, I could do it. I think it's that knowing that, hey, you got it back, like take your power back. Take your power back, because all these years your power is taken, and the longer you hold it. And for me, it was taking my power back, and I was feared to do a lot of things where I knew I was born with greatness, no matter where I was born at or came from. I was born with greatness because I was always out there creating something great, even though, you know, but that fear of, he's gonna block me, he's gonna stop me, he's gonna do. So when I think when people or women, or even people that feel they're in a certain position that they have no power for their voices to be heard, I think once they feel comfortable enough and actually see voices, or somebody that, hey, I'm not this person. It's almost something like I'm going through. I could speak. I am somebody.
Yeah.
Yes, your voice does count.
Yeah.
Your voice count. And I think once they see this and feel comfortable now, I think it's going to give them more strength. And it's all about teaching them to take their power back. Don't let nobody have power over you. You're meant to be something, and you got to face that giant and get your power back. And once they see this more and more, and women of color coming out more and not scared anymore, and not letting nobody's power or whoever they are with their status stop them from speaking out, it's going to give them more strength to come out as well, because they're going to feel they can relate. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
it's that seeing other people who look like you, sound like you, but also just the overall fact that this documentary is, you know, is like a door to a broader conversation. It's opening the door to other women. Drew, what would you add to that? What do you think needs to change?
I think Sheri is absolutely right. I think just by the sheer fact that we're sitting here with you, having this conversation, having come forward, having finally broken our silence, I think that's the beginning of the watershed that has to happen to begin to take up space. Hopefully that will make room for other women and girls to know that they're not alone, and that they have a right to be seen and heard and protected. But I also think that it's the enablers, the people who think they're innocent, the good guys who think they're not doing anything wrong because they're not raping anybody and they're not harassing anybody, but they're standing on the sidelines, they're silent, they're laughing off jokes that create a toxic environment, that allow the dynamic to fester, that ultimately leads to something that happens in 5 minutes behind a closed door. Those people need to get off the sidelines. The people who think they're innocent, the people who think that they don't have a responsibility here, their fingerprints are on this decades-long pattern of behavior by Russell Simmons as well. The good guys who turned a blind eye to maybe rumors. I wasn't aware of rumors, but I'm now becoming aware of rumors because people are contacting me. You know, I think that, and even when I came forward in December 2017, very few people in the music industry, in the Black music industry, reached out to me. And those who did reached out to me privately via text or direct message. And then I would see them commenting their support for Russell Simmons and L.A. Reid on social media.
Wow.
And they thought I didn't know, but I have friends who sent me screenshots. And, you know, I think that people have to pick a side, and they have to decide, are you okay enabling a rapist, or are you on the side of Black women and girls? And, you know, without the enablers, it can't possibly go on and on and on.
Right.
It requires a system. You need more than an abuser and a victim. You need a system to give that abuser the room to maneuver over a period of time unchecked for the kind of abuse that we experience to persist. So that's what I would say. The enablers, the innocent people, the bystanders need to get off of the sidelines and pick a side and do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. You know, now look, you've mentioned Mercedes Ladies, which was really the first all-female rap group, and you were part of that.
No, the first all-female DJ and rap group. We had two DJs.
Excuse me, DJ and rap group, of course. But if we're to talk feminist hip hop, if we're to talk that,
yeah,
what would it look like? What would it sound like? And then from that, how do power dynamics shape what styles of hip hop are resourced and centered? Let's have a conversation.
How did that look like? That looked like me and three girls used to go up. I used to run away home at 15, so I used to go up in the park and you sing like Grandmaster Flash, Previous Five, Bambaataa, Kool Herc, all of them on every corner. Boston Road was the place to be. It was a street and everybody be on the corner with they big things and boombox, 63 Park, but it was a schoolyard. So we used to come up there and we was like, wow. So you had MC Sha-Rock, you had Lisa Lee, you know, you had females that was supporting the men, and then you had a single female rapper that was, she was part of a man crew. And so we was like, okay, well, why is not like, we should like start an all girl crew. So it was three of us girls, and we end up start recruiting girls. And our thing was to go up against the male because it was an all male arena. And for that to happen, we was lucky that the Theodore and the manager, he supported us with the equipment. So us going out there and battling these men, and then our name got so popular because in all of the things you hear Mercedes, young ladies out there, because we used to wear the t-shirts with Mercedes ladies on it. So we was coming in there as some alpha strong women, and we didn't care, and we would go there. So that right there was a big empowerment, and that was a big move. And we did that, we conquered, and we might not have got the glitter and gold, but you know, we was signed to Russell at one time, but he didn't follow through on our record deal, but we didn't get the glitter and gold, but we paved that way, and we ended up becoming and making a mark in hip hop history. And as women at that time, we used to get sabotaged for shows. And one thing, the guys used to get paid, and when it was time for us to get paid, there was no money left. So, you know, it was, all of that's in my book. I tell the journey of it, but this is the thing. So we was some feisty alpha females that grew from the Bronx, and we was like, we don't care, we going up against you. We go out there and battle them, but that's how we was, and we was make sure we was gonna pave our way. And then when it money got involved, it was just about the men group. If you didn't notice, it was just about the men group, and then they really wasn't even talking about the females in hip hop.
Yeah.
That's what made me really drive to want to do a story about Mercedes Ladies, because I was like, are you kidding me? And so that right there was a very, how would you say? That right there was a challenge for us females. That was a challenge. So it started there. But I must add, back then, the men, it was never no inappropriate or out of character, like sexualized towards us. It was like, oh, who your girls are? Oh, get out of here. You're not gonna play. We earned our way to play. So we didn't go with that type of thing. And when Russell took us on him, we was doing rehearsal when our record was supposed to come out. He never even showed that type of character either, because my mother had trusted him at that time. Because she met him and she started liking what I was doing, because before she was gonna put me in a home, oh, you in the gang, Mercedes is a gang. So it took a turn. So it was a trust there with Russell, you know. My mom's like, okay, well, I'm tired of the girls not getting no money. So it was a trust there. So none of that we was more just went up against the guys, because we just was going up against the guys on the mic and the turntable, you know. But it never was nothing about but that was kind of sexism, because we used to get sabotaged. We never would get paid for those. So it had its way. Yeah. You know, as far as it coming to now, hip hop done changed into a whole different thing for women. First I just said, well, there's only one woman that come out every 4 years, and then the other woman have to take her out, and then there's another.
And then, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's still, to me, that pattern was still following in a different type of way. And now I see more female artists are coming out now. Now, like I said, it's crickets about anybody coming forward and saying they had to compromise themselves or they had to do this. And I think it's because the money that's involved in hip hop now.
Mm-hmm. Drew,
So
Drew,
now,
Drew, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I just think, you know, I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of a record executive.
Yes.
And how important it is to have women in those rooms and women with integrity in those rooms, not the women, because there were women in those rooms that were trying to serve me up on a platter to Russell Simmons. I'm gonna just tell you. And also to Ellie Reed. So I don't mean just any women. I mean women who are gonna draw the line, and also men with integrity. Because I'm realizing now as I look back at the sort of the career that I had from a distance, how important it is who makes the decisions and who shapes the content and the art. I remember a conversation I had with Russell when I was like 23 years old, probably. I had just gotten to Def Jam, actually 2 conversations, both when I first got there. One was when Biggie came to my office with the Junior Mafia demo, and he brought Little Kim, and he brought like the whole crew. And they were in my office when I finally got an office that was like the size of a closet. And I called Russell on speaker, so excited to say, oh my God, there's this group called Junior Mafia. There's this rapper named Little Kim. She's insane. And before I could say anything, he cut me off. He's like, women don't sell rap records. It's not going to happen. You know, he shut down Biggie. He's like, Biggie's not going to sell more than 10,000 records outside of Brooklyn. You know, he's not a star. Anyway, there was that, like, just his, now I understand who he is. I didn't know who he was then. You know, but shutting down the opportunity for me to sign a female rapper, you know, these choices make a difference in the culture and the way the culture looks. And another conversation that I've reflected on as I look back at my career through the lens of what I now know about who he is, was a conversation that we had at a meeting about a rapper named D, who was the DJ for Boss. It was either Boss or D. I can't remember which one of them, but they were putting out an album because I was working on both of their albums. Female rappers. I was really excited. I was a huge Boss fan. She had this record called Deeper that I loved. And we turned in the album, and Russell wanted the cover of her album to be a picture of her holding a gun. And the only question he had was, should she be holding the gun pointing to her head, or should she be holding the gun pointing in her mouth, as if she was going to kill herself? And the question was, which one should it be, pointing at her head or pointing in her mouth? And I said, as this like 23-year-old executive, excuse me, D is an empowered rapper. And I think it's crazy that she's suicidal on the cover of her album.
Yeah.
Why, how about she's not pointing a gun at her head or her mouth, and she's not holding a gun and pointing it at anything? Like, why can't she just be empowered? Why do we have to like tease her as suicidal? Like, her album isn't even about that. Like, why? And of course I was like drowned out, and I don't remember which thing they went with, and she may not even have ever gotten that far with her project. But it was just like, why doesn't anyone else in this room have anything to say about this? Or even the decision when Method Man's Takal album came in, and the interlude was just an interlude, Shorty, I'm there for you anytime you need me, which was just an interlude. And I said, this is breathtakingly beautiful, that a rapper like Method Man is like literally rhyming this ode of love to his girl. This has to be more than an interlude. You know, let's get a female singer. How about, actually, I'm gonna be honest, I first suggested Lauryn Hill, who I knew as a friend, but this is before she blew up, and Russell didn't know who that was. And then I said, well, Mary J would be insane. Like, yeah. Boom. And I had to fight for that, like fight. But again, it was my ears as a woman that heard that interlude and was like swooning. Oh my God, this is beautiful. I don't know if a man A&R would have heard that the way I heard that and fought for it, and then heard the idea for a duet, like a love song.
That was like a hood love anthem.
A hood love song meant so much to me.
Yes.
All around the world.
Yes.
Why you need a woman in the room. And even when I got to Arista, Lauryn Hill played A Rose Is Still a Rose for me over the phone, playing the guitar. And then I asked her to demo it, and I played it for Clive Davis, who played it for Aretha Franklin. And then he wanted Wyclef to produce it. And I said, no, let Lauren produce it. You know, and these little moments that I didn't even think of as radical or rebellious or resistance. It was just me in the room as a woman fighting for women to be seen and centered in a way that wasn't degrading. Makes a difference. So just, we have to be in the room fighting for our perspective that isn't sexualized and degraded. And we need men also to speak up. But it really does matter. The people that are making the media, it matters.
Yes.
Those decisions, those filters, those decisions that happen that could change the trajectory of an album or an artist or the soundtrack of the summer, you know? Those decisions get made around tables that are dominated by men. And I now look back and I realize they're dominated in some cases by predatory men. And that has an impact on the way we all see ourselves in the end. So it makes a difference.
Okay, let's move into the broader space. In light of Black Lives Matter and the slogans of "my skin isn't a crime," "no justice, no peace," and knowing that violence perpetuates violence, the process towards healing within the Black community demands that both these grave injustices, racial and intraracial, are worked on in tandem. How do you see this happening?
You know, I, again, kind of go back to the media point and the social media point, because I think we have an opportunity without the sort of monopoly and the bottleneck of a very few sort of hierarchical decision makers in terms of what conversations we're going to have. I think we may have an opportunity to have nuanced conversations finally, and also to have intraracial conversations. You know, everybody talks about Black Twitter. I love Black Twitter. Just like the conversations that we have sort of that stay below the radar. It's almost like our own underground railroad of conversation that we get to have. I'm hoping that we have the capacity as a people to have the interracial conversation about how we need to stop harming ourselves by brushing this abuse and toxic behavior under the rug, at the same time as we have the extra-racial, external conversation, the interracial conversation with allies who are interested finally in joining our struggle to push us forward as a community, not just as a Black community, but as a society, to be healthier and stronger and sustainably stronger about the ways the broader society oppresses all Black people, while we also do the hard work internally to unpack the ways in which we are carrying that condemned cell around in all of our heads and oppressing ourselves by ignoring the pain and suffering that we are enduring internally as Black women, excusing as Black men and as Black women who are enabling it, so that we can have a real shot here at moving forward. I hope we can literally walk and chew gum at the same time and talk about rape and racism. I always say I'm a survivor of both. So let's talk about both. And I hope we can do it, and I believe we can do it.
Yeah. Sure.
I kind of agree. I mean, Drew hit it right on point. I kind of agree with her. And one thing I could tell you about the that it feels so empowerment as people. And when you see the support and the allies joining forces, I actually seen like a lot, like even they was protesting out here where I live at in front of my building, and you seen different colors, different races, everybody, but it was so powerful because it was all as one. And it was just the people saying, we have enough, because we're all living on this planet. So if it affects you, it should affect me.
Right.
And this is the allies, and it's coming along. And I think it's such a powerful, because it's changing history. It's changing, like, okay, it's not just the, oh, you know, the Black people, they complain again. No, it's allies and people in general saying we all got to live on this planet Earth. If you my neighbor and you're getting hurt and you're getting broke down, how you think that's not going to eventually trickle over to me and affect me and my kids? I think it's just a beautiful thing. It's powerful. It's just the power of getting changes, and this is how you get the real change in things, is when you have allies and everybody's come together with one voice and one purpose. It's going to bring it's going to bring change, and that's how you bring change.
There's a very powerful African almost saying and belief called Ubuntu, which is very much what you said describes it. What happens to you happens to me too. So yes, I'm right on you with that one. Drew, you were going to say something.
Well, I just hope that white people understand, and I feel like just watching what's happening around the world and around the country, maybe that they finally do. They're not free either. They're not free to challenge the status quo. Amy Cooper may have felt she was powerful in Central Park that day because she could deputize herself. She could invoke her privilege to put this man's very life on the line because she didn't want to put her dog on the leash. But Amy Cooper, I hope she realizes at some point that she would not have been safe if she was calling the police to report a rape by a white man. And that as long as that 75-year-old peaceful protester in Buffalo could be pushed to the ground so violently, white people aren't free either, because if they speak up about the injustice that we experience, they're in the firing line too.
As well.
Right in the crosshairs.
Yeah,
so they're not free either. None of us are free until all of us are free. And they are discovering that when they have the audacity to speak out on our behalf, oh, the police will beat them to a bloody pulp too.
Yeah.
Because it's really not a just system to begin with. And so I'm hoping we can get there. We can understand that an unjust system is crippling every single person who is unwittingly benefiting from it. And it's certainly crippling those of us who knew from the beginning that, James Baldwin said that Black people don't have a midlife crisis because we found out the world wasn't fair when we were like 7. Like, we didn't need to wait till we were 45. We've been knowing it wasn't fair. And it's almost like the world is having a midlife crisis and realizing the whole game was rigged and it was unjust and they were passively benefiting from the injustice. And they're not bad people and they don't want to be a party to it either. Yeah. So I'm hoping we can get to a better place and live up to some of the lofty ideals that we articulated, that our forefathers articulated. And so I'm hopeful that maybe we're finally getting somewhere.
And with that hope, I have to say, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and for bringing this documentary to us all. You've spoken so much, and I wish we could continue the conversation, although I know it would be a nightmare trying to edit this. But for everyone watching or listening, you will find links to how you can stream on the record, as well as resources for those who might have been affected by the issues raised on the Equality Now, or on this conversation. You'll find all this information on the Equality Now website. Okay, so until next time, stay safe, stay well. Thank you so much, Sheri.
Thank you for having us
so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.